National parks cover millions of acres of pristine wilderness, but they also hide a chilling secret. Every year, people vanish from these lands, hikers, campers, and explorers, without a single trace. You'd think there'd be a central database tracking all these missing persons, right? Think again. The National Park Service admits they don't keep comprehensive records of the vanished. Officially, it's because of a lack of resources or the sheer scale of the parks. But what if that's just the cover story? Critics and researchers suspect there's a deeper reason, something the government doesn't want us to uncover. Could it be that national parks aren't just natural wonders, but strategic zones for secret experiments? Are these places the hunting grounds of strange creatures, kept hidden by shadowy agencies? Or worse, are the parks home to natural phenomena we don't understand, like interdimensional portals or electromagnetic fields that disrupt time and space? Think about it. These lands are remote, vast, and perfect for hiding things they don't want the public to know. Why else would the government be so vague, so evasive about tracking these disappearances? Is the truth too dangerous for us to handle? Stay with me as we unravel this web of conspiracy, uncover the shocking evidence, and ask the question no one dares to. Why do people disappear in national parks? And who's making sure we never find out? The lack of a centralized database isn't just an oversight. It's deliberate. The National Park Service has admitted they don't track missing persons, citing costs and complications. But here's where things get weird. Independent researchers who've tried to compile their own lists have been met with stonewalling, red tape, and even threats. If there's nothing to hide, why the resistance? Okay, now let's take a look at the work of David Paulides, a former police detective and the author of the Missing 411 book series. David became interested in the strange disappearances in national parks after a park ranger confided in him about the unusually high number of missing persons cases in these areas. When David attempted to obtain a comprehensive list of missing persons from the National Park Service through a Freedom of Information Act request, he encountered significant resistance. Here's what happened. When David requested information on missing persons cases, the National Park Service informed him that they did not maintain a centralized database of these incidents. Instead, he was told that records were scattered across individual parks or regional offices, making it nearly impossible to obtain a comprehensive list. When David pressed further and requested that the National Park Service compile the data for him, they quoted him an astronomical fee, reportedly around $1.4 million to produce the information. This figure seemed absurd, especially considering that other federal agencies often provide FOIA, requested data for reasonable fees. Critics have argued that this was a deliberate attempt to discourage him from pursuing the data. David noted that his experience with the National Park Service was unusually opaque compared to other law enforcement or governmental organizations he had worked with. He described it as stonewalling and speculated that the agency might be concealing something. David's work has since sparked widespread curiosity and concern about the lack of transparency regarding missing persons in national parks. His findings have highlighted bizarre patterns in many of these cases, such as disappearances near bodies of water or boulder fields, victims being found miles from their last known location, often in areas previously searched, strange conditions of recovered bodies, such as missing clothing or items left behind in inexplicable locations. The resistance David faced raises unsettling questions about why the NPS isn't more forthcoming with this information. If the disappearances are simply the result of accidents or natural causes, why the lack of accountability? This case remains one of the most compelling pieces of evidence fueling conspiracy theories about the mysteries of national parks. All right, I have 2 interviews for you today. In my first interview, I spoke to someone whose cousin went missing, and here's what he had to say.
Yeah, it was my cousin Megan. She was 29 when it happened. It's hard to talk about, honestly, but I'll try. So Megan was always kind of adventurous, you know? She wasn't one of those people who just stayed inside. She loved being outdoors, camping, hiking, all that. It was a few years ago. She was out in Glacier National Park in Montana. She'd gone out there with a couple of friends, but they weren't with her when she disappeared. They told us she went off on her own to take pictures or something. She was into photography, like really into it. She even brought this fancy camera that she saved up for months to buy. Anyway, she went off this trail, and she never came back. So the weird thing is, well, there's a couple weird things. First, they found her camera, like a park ranger found it a few days later, just sitting on this flat rock near a creek. No scratches, no water damage, nothing. It was almost too perfect, you know, like someone put it there on purpose. And when they checked the memory card, there were all these pictures of the trail she was on. Normal stuff, trees, rocks, the creek, but the last photo, it's so weird. It was blurry, like it looked like she'd been moving fast, or maybe she fell, but there's this shadow, like a figure. It doesn't look like a person, though. It's too tall, and I don't know, it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. And then her friend said they heard something the night she went missing. They were back at their campsite, and they swear they heard, like, screaming. Not like animal sounds, but human screaming. They thought it was Megan, so they ran towards the sound, but when they got there was nothing. No one. Just silence. They looked for her until it got dark, but they didn't find anything. The rangers did this big search, you know, helicopters, dogs, all of it, but they didn't find a trace. No body, no clothes, nothing. And the official report just said, like, probable accident, like she fell or something. But how do you explain that camera? Or the shadow in that photo? Or the screaming? It just doesn't add up. I don't know. I keep thinking about how much Megan loved those parks, you know? She thought they were like the most peaceful places on Earth. But now I can't go near them.
So this next interview is someone who went missing but was found. This is his response when I asked him about what he remembers.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, not much. It's all like a blur, you know? One minute I was hiking and the next, I woke up like miles away from where I was. It still doesn't make any sense. So, I was out at Olympic National Park in Washington. I go there a lot. I mean, I've been hiking since I was a kid, so I know my way around, you know? This wasn't like my first time out there. Anyway, I was on this trail near Lake Crescent. It was a clear day, nothing weird, nothing out of the ordinary. Then, I remember stopping to drink some water. I sat down on this big log to rest for a bit, and after that, nothing. It's just blank. When they found me, they said I was about 10 miles off the trail. 10 miles. Like, I don't even know how that's possible. They said I looked disoriented, like I didn't even know my own name at first. And my watch, it was dead. It just stopped at 3:47 p.m. I remember checking it right before I sat down, and it was working fine then. And here's the thing that really freaks me out. When I woke up, my boots were gone. Like, completely gone. I had my socks on, and they were shredded like I'd been walking through the woods, barefoot. But my feet, they weren't even cut up. A little dirty, sure, but no scratches, no blood, nothing. How does that even happen? I don't remember being scared or anything. I wasn't cold, I wasn't hungry, even though I'd been gone for 2 days. And my phone, it was still in my pocket, but it wouldn't turn on, like the battery was completely drained. When the search team found me, they kept asking questions like, did you hit your head? Or did you see anyone out there? And I didn't know what to say because honestly, I don't remember a single thing. I feel like I just blinked. And the next thing I know, I'm standing in the middle of the woods and they're yelling my name. The doctors said it could have been dehydration or heat stroke, but that doesn't feel right, you know? I mean, I've been hiking for years. I know how to handle myself out there. I wasn't lost. I wasn't lost. At least, I don't think I was. And the weirdest part, a couple of my things were missing. My boots, like I said, but also my knife and my backpack. They never found them. It's like they just disappeared. I can't stop thinking about it though. Like, what happened in those 2 days? Where was I? It's like a piece of me is missing.
Now, let's get to our first story. This story was first shared through a forum post about 2 years ago. It happened in late September 2014 at Glacier National Park in Montana, based on an account from Kevin, an experienced hiker and wildlife photographer who was leading a small group on a remote backpacking trip. 4 people made up the group: Kevin, an older couple from Texas, and Tim, a solo traveler from Wisconsin who had joined them the day before. Tim, in his mid-30s, was chatty and easygoing, sharing stories from his road trip. He seemed perfectly normal, nothing out of the ordinary. That day's plan involved a long hike through several miles of trail, looping back to their campsite by evening. By noon, they reached a fork in the trail. One path climbed a steep ridge for panoramic views, while the other descended toward a lake. They paused to rest and decide their route. Tim announced he wanted to hike up to the ridge alone, promising to catch up with the group later. He said he was a fast hiker, Kevin recalled, so it didn't seem like a problem. The group watched as Tim waved, strapped on his pack, and headed uphill. Giving him a 20-minute head start, they took the lower trail toward the lake. But when they returned to camp at dusk, Tim hadn't shown up. At first, Kevin wasn't alarmed. Glacier's maze-like trails can easily disorient hikers, and it wasn't unusual for someone to lose track of time. By nightfall, however, concern set in. Kevin called Tim's name into the woods and used a whistle to signal him, but the quiet of the forest was unbroken. Deciding to wait until morning, the group resolved to notify the park rangers if Tim still hadn't returned. The next day, a search team headed up the ridge where Tim had been headed. Within a few hours, they found something strange: his backpack. It was neatly placed upright next to the trail, untouched, with all his supplies still inside. Yet there was no sign of him. The search expanded. That afternoon, 6 miles from the backpack along another trail, searchers found Tim's shirt, shoes, and socks in a clearing. The items were carefully folded in a neat pile. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, just his clothes. Search dogs briefly picked up a scent, but it abruptly disappeared, as if he had vanished. Tension grew as the search continued for 5 days. Helicopters flew overhead while crews combed every ridge and valley within miles. But not another trace of Tim was found. He seemed to have disappeared without explanation. Kevin couldn't shake the memory of watching Tim walk off, calm and confident, only to vanish without a trace. Though the official investigation eventually ended, Kevin keeps wondering if something more inexplicable took place. To this day, Tim remains missing. This next story was shared with me over Facebook Messenger by a guy named Mike. It happened in the fall of 2003, up in the Smoky Mountains National Park. Mike's younger brother, Tommy, had gone camping with some friends. Always adventurous, Tommy loved hiking and exploring. But what happened on that trip has haunted Mike ever since. The night before Tommy disappeared, he called Mike from the campground. At first, it was just casual conversation about the beautiful trails and changing leaves. But then Tommy mentioned something strange. He said he'd seen lights in the woods earlier that day. Not flashlights or anything normal. They were brighter and moved in odd patterns, hovering and zigzagging between trees before vanishing and reappearing somewhere else. He joked they might be mountain ghosts, but Mike could tell the experience shook him. Tommy described how eerily quiet the forest had been at the time, which only unsettled him more. The next morning, Tommy's friends woke up to find him missing. At first, they assumed he'd gone for an early solo hike, something he often did. But when he didn't return by noon, concern set in. By sunset, they called the park rangers. Mike got the news that night, and he drove to the park the next morning to join the search. Despite days of effort involving search teams, dogs, and helicopters, there was no sign of Tommy. No footprints, no clothing, nothing. Some of Tommy's friends later admitted they too had seen strange lights in the woods during the trip. Like Tommy, they'd brushed it off at the time, figuring it wasn't important. But months passed, and the search turned up no leads. The official theory was that Tommy got lost and died of exposure, but Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something else happened. Mike shared that he still has unsettling dreams about the lights. In them, he's searching for his brother in a pitch-black forest, following faint, flickering lights deeper into the trees. He wakes up before reaching them, always shaken. Though he's returned to the Smokies a few times since, he sticks to busy trails now. Yet when the sun sets, the same thought creeps back into his mind. What did Tommy really see out there? And are those lights still waiting for someone else to find them? This story was shared with me through a message and took place in October 2022 in the Allegheny National Forest, Pennsylvania. Chris and Jordan, two longtime friends who grew up camping together, went on a weekend trip to escape the daily grind. What began as a peaceful getaway ended with an encounter they still can't explain. Chris and Jordan spent much of the day hiking before finding a small clearing among tall pines for their campsite. After setting up their tent, they gathered firewood as it was turning to evening. It was during this task that Chris suddenly stopped. "Do you smell that?" he asked. Jordan dismissed it as just the damp forest air, but Chris insisted it was something metallic, sharp, maybe electrical. Shrugging it off, they continued on, venturing 50 or 60 yards from their campsite. It was Jordan who first noticed the light. Through the trees, he spotted a bluish-white glow, steady and unnatural, unlike the flicker of a campfire. "Do you see that?" he asked. They approached cautiously, the strange metallic smell now unmistakable and growing stronger. The light wasn't coming from a camp or any man-made source they could identify. Instead, it appeared to be emanating from an oval shape, hovering a few feet off the ground. It shimmered, almost mirage-like, and warped the space around it, bending the nearby trees in an impossible way. "What the hell is that?" Chris whispered, the hairs on his arms standing on end. Jordan moved closer despite Chris's warning. "It looks like a hologram or something. Maybe a projector," he said. But there were no visible beams or devices. It wasn't just light, and it didn't feel solid either. Then, the shimmering oval flickered, and a low humming sound began to emanate from it. Jordan jumped back, startled. "Okay, yeah. Nope. Let's go." Chris needed no further convincing. They ran back to their campsite, the tension palpable. Neither said much as they hastily built a fire, casting wary glances back into the woods. By morning, they decided to cut the trip short and head home. On the drive back, Jordan tried to suggest logical explanations. Government tech, perhaps, or a freak weather phenomenon. But Chris didn't want to entertain any theories. Even now, Chris refuses to return to that part of the forest, while Jordan, when joking about it, always ends by saying, "Whatever it was, we weren't supposed to see it."